Hi everybody and welcome back to Be Like Christ. Sorry I'm out of breath, I just had to go up the stairs. Where is my Bible? If you're trying to do God's will, you are never outside of the providence of God. Do you believe that? If you don't believe that and you think I'm crazy, in Acts chapter 16 there are at least two stories, that prove this to us, about how God's providence works in situations that we don't even expect it to be working. Here's the first one. We all know the Apostle Paul. Acts chapter 16 is about the Apostle Paul and his journeys. He's traveling through a place called Phrygia and then Galatia. Weird names, I know. But modern day Turkey, that area. And he wants to go to a place called Bithynia. You know, he thinks to himself, I think my next destination should be Bithynia. That would probably be a great place to do the Lord's work. Yet, God comes to him and says, you're not going to Bithynia. You're going somewhere else. Paul had evidently thought of all the reasons why it would be a good idea to go to Bithynia, and God comes along and totally redirects his life. And like Paul, you've probably been in a situation like that. Maybe you are wanting to do the Lord's work, and you set out a pathway, and you say, this is a great plan. This is the best way for me at this time in my life to serve the Lord. So you do all the preparation, maybe get the good grades, or whatever you have to do to be qualified for this. And you get to the point, the decision point, and you don't get accepted. Or God prevents you from going somehow. Or for some reason, somehow, some way, you can't take that path. And God decides that, He's going to send you over here. And here's where it gets tricky. We can read the end of Paul's story, and what we find out is that redirection by God was actually a great thing. It directed him in a way that would be very fruitful for the kingdom of God, and ultimately I think Paul knew that God knew better, and he sent him in the right direction. But for us in the moment, when our plans that we have worked so hard for don't work out, and we can't see the end of our story, that's where we begin to doubt a little bit. And we begin to ask questions about, well, does God really care about me? Is He really directing my situation? Because here I was trying to serve God, and it all fell through. Here's where we need to learn from the example of Paul. In the end, we know that God knew best. And God is certainly not going to waste the life of the people who are trying to do His will. God is the best at using His servants in the most effective way possible. And if He has to redirect your life in order to do that, that'll be a great thing for us in the end. But a lot of times we have to be patient and trusting enough to understand that His providence is at work when our plans don't work out and God sends us to do something else. God knows best. Don't forget it. Paul didn't forget it. Okay, so here's another example of how God is working through providence even when we least expect it in the lives of the people that love Him. If you read through the rest of Acts chapter 16, you'll come to Philippi with Paul, and he's there and he's preaching. And there comes a woman to him who has a spirit of fortune telling. And she's a slave, and she makes her masters a lot of money by doing fortune telling. She comes up to Paul, and for days on end, she just screams. And everywhere Paul goes, she's behind him screaming and screaming and screaming. And the text eventually says that Paul gets annoyed with her, and he casts out the spirit that was in her. And you might say, well, okay, I don't see God's providence anywhere in that. But this is where knowing the rest of the story really becomes very important, because this woman's masters get very angry at Paul because he casts out the spirit and their source of income is gone. So they proceed to get Paul beaten and then thrown in prison. But in prison, Paul meets a man, and we know him as the Philippian jailer. And Paul's able to share the gospel with that man, and his whole household is converted because of the crazy woman. Maybe there's that person in your school. They're the most annoying person. They talk all the time. They follow you around. You have no interest in anything that they have to share with you, and yet they won't leave you alone. And they have specifically selected you as the victim of all of their annoyance. Or maybe you're at that work conference and somehow the weird guy finds you, and for the rest of the conference, the entire week, he follows you around and wants to sit by you all the time. Or maybe if you're a mother, there's the woman who doesn't have any children but wants to give you all the tips for how to raise your children. You know anybody like that? In those moments, most of the time, I admit, our goal is not to think, how is God using this particular person for His providence? Our thoughts are, how do I get out of this situation and lose this shadow of mine? In those situations, providence is probably the last thing that's on our minds. And yet, in Philippi, it's God that uses the most annoying person in that entire city to lead Paul directly to the people who have open hearts to accept the gospel to begin a church in Philippi. So when you find yourself in a situation like the two that we've just talked about, I know it's hard, but try to bring your mind back to these examples. When you find that your plans aren't working out, the things that you had planned for and dreamed about aren't coming to fruition, remember that God all the time redirects people's lives to make them better in the long run. And when you get in a situation where you just think it's rotten luck, like maybe the most annoying person in the whole school finds you and wants to be your best friend, remember that God can use any situation and any person to lead you exactly where He wants you, to share the gospel, or to be a good example, or to be kind to someone who needs it on any given day. I want to make one last point before we leave this text. And it's for the people who comment on my videos and say, this channel is just stupid. I don't even believe in God. You're wasting your time. Stop trying to tell people how to live. Jesus is a fake mythological character. And, anyone who believes that the earth was created rather than formed by the Big Bang is retarded. Believe me, I know you're there. I read your comments. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. But notice this, and this is specifically for you. And I don't say this to be angry or malicious, but actually to prove a point. And that is that you notice that there are people in this story who are totally opposed to Paul. They think Paul's dumb and that his God's fake. And so what do? Those masters of that slave girl are saying to themselves, we'll get rid of this guy, get him off the streets, crush his message, and so they get him thrown in prison and beaten. But you know what? They played just as important a role in the providence of God in bringing Paul to the heart that was open to the gospel as anyone else in the story. And so, what can we learn from that? I think we can learn that even when we are resisting the will of God, we mock Him, have no interest in Him, we are still being used for His purposes. And the choice really for us is, am I going to comply and become part of the story and of the will of God and be obedient to Him and allow Him to use me for great things and for the salvation of people's souls? Or am I going to resist Him and try to thwart His purposes and ultimately fail and end up being used by Him to direct God's servants to people who actually will listen to the gospel? The important point is you can't escape the providence of God. Judas tried, Pilate tried, Herod tried, the high priest tried, the Pharisees and the Sadducees tried. They all resisted, and God used them anyway to accomplish what He wanted to accomplish. You cannot escape the providence of God, whether you are obedient and trying to live the way He wants you to, or whether you're in total opposition to Him. God is sovereign over everything, and you can't escape. So you should just stop resisting and join us. Thank you, everyone, for watching the video. I hope this will encourage you and future-proof you for the times in your life when you think maybe God is not at work or has forgotten about you maybe. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, do it. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. If there's any other applications from Acts chapter 16, let me know. Put them down below. Like the video, share it with your friends, and I will see you guys next time.